Hi there. Welcome back to Tuesday's Tips. I'm Greg Kaiser, and if you joined me last week, you were able to see some of my top 5 tips, and there was a bonus one in there also. Things that I learned early on and very thankful for when it came to my own photography journey. This week, we're going to go a step beyond that, and I want to talk about another list. And this is going to be 5 things that I wish I knew earlier. It goes hand in hand with what we were talking about last week, but these are things that might have changed the direction that I went in photography. It would have definitely affected how long it took me to get to this point. And I wanted to kind of share some of these things with you, and some of them probably going to be no-brainers, and some of them might be those eye-opening moments. And if you're getting started in photography kind of cold, like I was years ago, almost 20 years ago now, there are some concepts that just I never would have thought. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to go ahead and start with one that I'm almost embarrassed to admit. Over the years, I've taught a lot, and I have taught that ISO is something that you want to, at all costs, keep as low as possible. Whatever that native setting was for your camera, usually that's going to be ISO or ISO. Both are technically correct. I can't get used to saying ISO. But anyway, some of them are 100 and some are 200. So why have I come around and said something different now? Because I don't really subscribe to that near as much as I once did. Now, I don't go around routinely and crank the ISO or ISO all the way up to max to give me the fastest possible shutter speed, because it does come with some compromises. You get some compromise in image quality. A lot of times you will sacrifice dynamic range, you will sacrifice color rendition, saturation, and the dreaded grain. Now, when I was learning photography, it was still kind of in the digital infancy. And it really was a case, and especially my first camera, which was a Sony f828, anything off of the lowest ISO value was going to make for a very grainy image. And at the time, there was not a whole lot of noise reduction software out there, and even if there was, I was not good enough to use it. So I really concentrated on keeping that ISO down to 100, or actually on that camera it was 64. And when I got into DSLRs in 2007, I routinely stayed at 100, sometimes to the detriment of the image itself. As I have progressed, and here in the last few years, I have really come off of my fear of boosting the ISO. And what I have found is, in good lighting situations where you're not having to boost shadows exorbitantly, you can boost that ISO up to 800, 1600 and not have any appreciable noise there. But what it is very handy for is allowing for a faster shutter speed to freeze things like wind motion in grass or trees, or if you're doing portrait work, if you're trying to freeze your subject. It is a great tool to use, and I see the validity of using it in the right situations. And as long as your lighting is good, you're going to have plenty of signal coming into the camera that you're not going to introduce that noise that I was so worried about before. And then you add to it, the cameras built nowadays are very, very strong at higher ISO levels. So you're going to get less noise, less compromises, the color rendition, saturation, dynamic range, things like that. And then on the back end in post-processing, we have got some great tools from just about every image processor out there in how to deal with the digital noise, color noise that comes in. So there's so many different ways to deal with it now. The cameras are much better with it now. So I have officially come off of my high horse of 100 ISO or nothing. Uh, don't sweat it. Use what you need to get the picture. I would rather have a little bit of noise to deal with in post than to have a blurry image or to have to compromise on depth of field to keep motion blur at bay. If I need to stop the lens down and still need a fast shutter speed, the only thing I've got left in that exposure triangle is going to be the ISO. So don't sweat it. I wish I had known that earlier. It has taken me a lot of years to come off of that. I'm glad that I have, and my imagery has improved, even though my ISO levels are, creeping up 800, 1600 on kind of a regular basis, comparatively speaking, since once upon a time I could have just locked in the ISO and never worried about it. Never ever would have considered changing it, but now I've gone beyond that. So I wish I'd learned that earlier. Number two, and this is going out to those that are wanting to get into landscape photography. I chose landscape photography because I thought, hey, I can point a camera at a tree, take a picture, and I can sell calendars, I can sell books, I can do all kinds of stuff, and I'm going to be a successful photographer because landscape photography is easy. Yeah, I think Ansel Adams actually put it best when he said something to the effect of landscape photography is the supreme test of the photographer and often the supreme disappointment. He nailed it there. Landscape photography is difficult. You have to get up very early in the morning, you have to stay out late at night, you have to concentrate on weather, you have to consider the light, which you have no control over, you have to go with what is given you. You have to find compositions in natural situations which are very chaotic, which do not necessarily lend themselves to a very simple composition. So all of the things that I took for granted with landscape photography because I was reading books about different landscape photographers and seeing their pictures, and I thought, yeah, this is great, this is wonderful. They're at a pretty scene, point the camera, take the picture. I didn't realize how much work went into what they were doing with the research, with the scouting, with the looking at the conditions, finding the best conditions for the area that they're wanting to shoot, for that composition, coming back multiple times. I can't discount that enough. You don't do landscape photography as a one and done thing. You don't just go out there and you just get lucky and the conditions are right, you know the composition, there's nothing else that you want to change, everything just worked out. You have to go to these places multiple times over the course of many months, many years to get the images that you are actively looking for. So landscape photography is very difficult. And also, as a sub point to this, landscape photography is also very saturated. There are a lot of photographers out there that very possibly are thinking like I did getting started. I've got a camera, I like to take pictures, I'm going to do the landscape. It's readily available, it's easy. But there's a ton of landscape photographers out there, and they inundate social media feeds with pictures, and I'll be the first to admit, many of them are fantastic images. And I'm not taking anything at all away from them. I'm just saying if you are wanting to get into landscape photography, be prepared to be part of the noise, part of the crowd. If you want to stand out, you might want to go into a subgenre, a specialized niche of landscape photography, kind of like I have with my decay photography. I still consider it landscape, but the subject matter is a little more unique. So that helps me stand out a little bit from the rest of the crowd. So I wish that I had learned that earlier and not spent as much time as I did working purely landscape photography, trying to make a name for myself, because it's an uphill battle and it's very hard to do. Point number 3 kind of is along the same lines. When I first started photography, I had this weird idea that it was going to be my retirement plan. And when I was done with my 30 years of being a police officer, I was going to retire, be a photographer, and I was going to have a business and sell my images and it was going to be great and wonderful, and I'm sure that you all understand the different facets of that dream, as it's not that unique of a dream. What I wish I had known much earlier is that being a professional photographer actually has very little to do with photography. Being a photographer has a lot to do with photography. You have to understand the technical end of it. You have to you have to have a good set of skills and techniques to make it work. And it's all kind of isolated down to your interaction with the camera and the scene. Being a professional photographer, however, you have to do things like become a business. You have to file and pay taxes. You have to keep track of stuff. You have to invoice. You have to worry about inventory. You have to worry about overhead. How much am I spending on this camera gear? Am I going to be able to see a return? Will it help me make money? I need to dedicate time to going out and making money. I need to do things like this video to market myself, my product, get my name out there. There is very little to do with photography when you want to be a professional. Not trying to push anybody away from it. It's a great profession if you can get into it. I've been full-time doing photography since 2019. It's been a rough road. I'll be very honest with you. I'm not a good businessman. I'm good with finances, but I'm a terrible businessman, which means that the professional end of my photography is lagging where I think it should be. I don't have the tools to be able to do that. Had I understood what it was to be a professional photographer before I made that jump, I would have gone, taken some courses in business, in marketing. I would have put more emphasis on learning that part of it. As it is, I learned the photography, felt confident with it, had made some sales, got some great connections, and jumped right on in, and we're just kind of here. If I was a business person, then I could be doing a whole lot more. And if you pay attention, a lot of the best photographers out there, and I am not saying that I'm in this crowd, I'm just using this for an example. A lot of the best photographers that I have seen in social media, websites, whatever, they are not full-time. They are not professional. They are the enthusiasts. They are the ones that go out on the weekends. They are the ones that have a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 that pays their bills, that they know they're going to get an income from. They have that financial security. They use their free time to go out and create. And that's all they want to do, is go out and create. And some of the best photographs that I have seen are from these people, because they are not concerned with, well, quarter's coming up, I need to go ahead and get all the paperwork done so I can file my quarterly sales tax. I need to get everything documented for my tax professional so that when it comes time to file taxes, I file everything correctly. I know how I'm doing all. They're not worried about all that. They went out and they got the GFX 100 Mark II, spent an arm and a leg for it because they wanted to shoot it. And they went out and they enjoyed it. And they created great pictures with it. Whereas, from my standpoint as a professional, can I justify that much money? Because will I make that much money from that? And I can't. I went through that not that long ago in my portrait work, because to do the portraiture the way that I wanted to do it, I needed a slightly different system than what I was using with my DSLR. So I moved into mirrorless for portrait work, and there was a large expense, and it took me about 2 years to make that back. And that was one of those questions that I had to ask myself before I made that choice, and it still wasn't at the level that I would like to be, but I had to make those compromises. So being a professional photographer, very little to do with the photography end. It has more to do with the business end and the finances. So understand that, and if you just want to create beautiful imagery, just do that. if you find this great niche and you're bringing in a lot of money, more power to you, congratulations. Let that direct you. But don't go into it saying, I want to be a professional photographer, because being a professional photographer is not as much fun as being an enthusiast. I've done it both ways. It was a lot more fun when I could just go out when I wanted to and do what I wanted to and not answer to anybody. So, number 4, this is a big one for anybody, professional or enthusiast. It pays to understand how you actually view the world. You're thinking about this and you're saying, where's he going to go with this? When I first started, I was inspired by grand landscape scenes. Like I said, I wanted to be a landscape photographer, so I researched a lot of landscape photographers. And what I saw were the big, grand landscapes that captured great big mountain ranges, a big lake, big skies, lots of clouds, lots and lots and lots of information in this scene. So when it came time for me to become a landscape photographer, because it was easy, I went out and tried to capture these same types of scenes. My pictures were extremely boring because, again, landscape photography is difficult. I didn't understand that, but my pictures were boring because I wasn't actually capturing the images like I saw them. It wasn't until probably a decade after starting that I realized there was a connection between how I see as a person and how I make my camera see. Because we have to translate what this mechanical device, this camera, does with visual information through things like lenses, focal lengths, and all that. We have to translate that into our own vision. And what I did not realize was I see things in a much more isolated, almost minimalist view. I pick out details in a scene. And what I mean is, if we were looking at this whole area right here, I would not see everything here in the background, me and everything. I would not see this if I came into a room. I would focus on the person talking, or if there was no person here, I would find something like this right here that was interesting, and then I'd wonder why it was interesting. And this is where my attention would be, all the bib numbers from when I was a cyclist. I'm not worried about any of the lighting modifiers, the picture on the wall over here, and it feels weird pointing and looking at myself, but you kind of get the point. I realized that what I saw in a scene was much more narrowed down than those grand landscapes that I was trying to mimic and learn from. So I started doing more specific compositions, maybe just a tree, maybe an aspect of a waterfall, maybe a trail going through a woodland. These were things that I started to look at, and I realized my photography improved greatly when I started shooting true to how I saw a scene. And this got amplified even more when I realized that I really enjoyed decay subjects, especially and specifically old rusted cars. I can find little small isolations on a single car. I can come away with half a dozen to a dozen pictures of bits and pieces of a car because I see those things. When I was in school, one of my jobs through that time period was a detailer. I cleaned the cars, and I would go in and do all the little small, cleaning in the vents, around emblems, and I trained my eyes to see in those little small detailed areas. So this now corresponds to how I do photography. It's what's natural for me. It's how I see and how I process the world. And my job as a photographer is to show everybody else how I see, not to show people how other people see, because that's not going to come across as being a valid picture. It's going to come across as being rather fake, actually. So had I understood that what I was producing as a photographer was deeply tied to how I see the world, I would have paid more attention to knowing how I see the world and how I react to a scene rather than come up to a big grand landscape where I see one section of the mountains that really interests me, but I try to get the wide angle lens out and do this grand thing where what I really like about a scene gets lost. So I'm not communicating anything through that picture to my viewer except I was here, not why I was here and why I was taking the picture. Once I figured that out, my photography improved markedly, and my satisfaction with my own photography improved quite a bit. So that brings us to the last point that I want to make, and this is one that I really wish that I had learned earlier, and I really didn't learn this until maybe just a few years ago. And it's simple. Don't force your photos. Yeah, that's right. It just is that simple. If you're not feeling it, if you're out in a scene and it's just not working, don't force it. Take a break. Take a mental break. Change your subject. Change where you're shooting from. Because what I found is the pictures that I spend the most time trying to set up and trying to compose and trying to figure out, those that I spend an exorbitant amount of time on, I generally get home and look at it and it still doesn't make me happy. But in the past, I've thought, well, I've invested 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours or whatever in this composition. I need to find one that works. And I will go through all the different pictures and cull out and edit it down to one that works. It doesn't work well, but it works. And I can go back through all the pictures in my archives. I can still pick those pictures out because they work, but they have no soul to them. They don't capture what I wanted to capture. They are not a good communication from me. What I should have done was abandoned that particular thing and either gone for a different angle or just come back at another time. Because generally, I would go back to that because I'd never felt that that picture was right. I'd go back at another time, take me 10, 15 minutes, I'd have several pictures, get home, was excited about all of them, and had to pick the best one. Same composition, same subject, different mindset, different lighting, different time. Had I not forced it, I could have gone and done other things that may have appealed to me more. I just didn't realize it at the time, but I would have reacted more positively and gotten better pictures. Just keep those ideas in the back of my head saying, okay, I'm going to come back and try this again another time. I'm not going to force it today. There's other times, and not talking about specific compositions, but there's other times when I feel like I should be going out to take pictures because, well, being a professional photographer has little to do with photography. It has to do with marketing and pushing the business forward and staying relevant and staying current. So that's a concern. I haven't been out for a while. I need to go out. I need to do something. I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling creative. I'm stressed. I'm depressed, whatever. Those are times when I don't need to go out. And I'm doing much better about that now, but there were other times I would start to panic. If it had been a couple of weeks and I hadn't been out with the camera, I would panic. Oh my gosh, I'm going to forget how to take a picture. I don't remember where the shutter button is. Where's that on-off button? Those concerns were never met with any validity. I can go months and come back and pick up a camera, and I feel a little rusty, but it comes back quickly, and the pictures are usually really good. The takeaway is don't force the photos at the time. Let them come naturally. When you are a creative person, whether it's photography, painting, drawing, whatever, but specifically photography for this argument. When you're a creative person, that creativity is not a time clock. You can't punch in, punch out. For the true creative moments to happen, you have to be in the situation. You have to be a part of the picture. You have to impart yourself in what you're capturing. If you're forcing it, you're taking yourself out of it and you're checking boxes. Yes, interesting subject. Yes, we've got decent light. Yes, this composition follows the rule of this or that or the other. My exposure is right. Okay, now we go through the editing process and okay, this one works. Now let's post-process. It becomes a checklist. Nobody wants to see a checklist framed on their wall. They want to see something that the artist has expressed, something that is not forced. I wish I had known that earlier because I wasted a lot of time, a lot of energy, and put out a lot of pictures that I'm not necessarily proud of because I thought I needed to force it. So I hope this list has helped you and at least made you think about some things that you might not have, especially if you're just getting started in photography. If you've been at it for a little while, you may have figured these things out, but if not, I hope that a couple of them help you out as well. That's my whole point behind doing this channel and this Tuesday's Tips thing. I want to help other photographers, not to become like me, but to benefit from things that I've learned so that you can become the best you that you can, and you can produce the best photographs that you're able to. And if there's anything I can ever do to help you, especially with like mentorships, I can do that in person, we can do it online, let me know. I am very invested in photography. I'm very passionate about it, if you haven't guessed. And I want to help those that want to get into photography be able to do just that. And there's a lot of gatekeepers out there. There's a lot of fear about, oh my gosh, this is too complicated. I'm never going to understand this. All it takes is for somebody to kind of boil it down to the basics and then work up from there. Anybody can do this. I'm proof. I'm anybody. Never had an art or an art class in school. Didn't care for the arts. Couldn't draw. Couldn't paint. And yet here I am, and I consider myself a creative person at this point, an artistic person, somebody that likes to create visual images. And that happened. And it just happened at a time when, it helped me with my career as far as stress relief, and it just went from there. So I hope that this benefited you. If it has, give it a like. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. It does help. We're 320 something subscribers at this point, which I'm really happy with. It's not growing, by monetizing standards by any stretch, but if I've got 300 people that have subscribed to me, then I feel like I'm doing something right and giving information that is beneficial. So thank you for joining me, and we'll be back here hopefully next week with another Tuesday's Tips. Not sure what I'm going to talk about, but I'm sure we'll come up with something. So until then, happy shooting, and take care, and we'll see you later.